I served on the fleet that mocked the human warship. I am telling you that first plainly before anything else, because every other voice you will ever hear tell this story tells it from the outside. The analysts, the historians, the ones who studied the wreck afterward and made their careful theories. I was inside it. I was on the bridge of a Khev raider when we laughed at the lone human ship, and I was on that same bridge 11 minutes later when our entire fleet was rendered helpless in the space of 4 seconds, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to make people understand the thing I learned in those 4 seconds, which is not the thing the title promises you. The title says we were wiped out. We were not wiped out. That is the whole point. That is the thing that haunts me. We deserve to be wiped out, and we were not, and the not is the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. Let me start where it started. My name is Drevek and I am Khev. You may not know my people, and if you do, you likely know us by reputation, and the reputation is mostly earned, so I will not pretend to you that we were anything other than what we were. The Khev are a raider confederation, scavengers, salvagers, and when salvage runs thin, pirates. We are a hard people from a hard origin, born on a poor scattered cluster of worlds with too little of everything, and we learned early in our history that what you cannot grow or mine, you take, and we built a whole culture around the taking. We prized strength. We prized the kill. Most of all, and this is the thing that matters to the story, we prized the boast. Among the Khev, a warrior's worth was measured in the trophies of what they had destroyed and the tales they could tell of it, and a Khev captain standing rose and fell on the kills painted on the hull, and the stories roared in the mess. We were loud, and we were proud, and we were cruel, and I did not know any of those were faults, because they were simply the water I swam in. Let me tell you how a Khev is made, so you understand how I came to laugh at a thing I should have wept at. From the time we can walk, our young are given the boast songs, long roaring recitations of the deeds of our ancestors, every one of them a tale of taking, of a richer ship stripped, a softer people broken, a rival fleet scattered. We learn our history as a list of what we have seized. There is no Khev story about building a thing or growing a thing or saving a thing. There are only the taking stories, because in the poor scattered cluster where we began, taking was survival, and survival became pride, and pride became the whole of who we were. A Khev child who shows mercy is corrected, gently at first, then less gently, because mercy, we are taught, is the softness that gets you taken, and a Khev who can be soft is a Khev who will die poor and unsung. I had that taught into me bone deep. By the time I was grown, I could not even see a defenseless thing without some part of me, the trained Khev part, calculating what it held and how easily it could be stripped. That was not a flaw in me by Khev reckoning. That was me being correctly made. I was a good Khev. That is the worst thing I can say about my younger self, and it is true. I was a good Khev, and being a good Khev meant being able to look at frightened families and feel hunger instead of pity. I was young. I was a third bridge officer, junior, eager, desperate to earn my own trophies and my own boasts, and I believed with my whole young heart that the strong took and the weak were taken, and that this was not just the way of things but the right way, the only way, the way that made a Khev a Khev. I had not yet earned a single kill of my own. I burned for it. I lay in my bunk at night and imagined the day I would have my first wreck to boast of, the day the older warriors would roar my name in the mess, and I did not once, not one single time in all that imagining, think about who would have to die for me to have my boast. The dying was abstract to me. The prey was abstract. That is what the boast culture does. It turns the taken into trophies, and trophies have no faces, and a young Khev can dream his whole young life of glory without ever once picturing the family on the other end of the kill. I want you to understand that about me, because the person telling you this story is not a good person, or at least was not, on the day it happened. I was part of what we did. I cheered for it. If you are going to learn the thing I learned, you have to learn it from someone who earned the lesson the hard way, by being on the wrong side of it, by deserving what almost came and being spared it anyway. So, I was Khev. I was proud. I was cruel. Hold that and let me tell you about the graveyard and the fleet and the lone human ship that did not run. The place was called the Tarn Drift, and if you have never seen a shipbreaker's graveyard, you cannot imagine it. Picture a vast slow river of wreckage, light years long, drifting in the dark at the edge of civilized space. The accumulated dead ships of 1,000 years of war and disaster and abandonment, hulks the size of cities tumbling end over end in the starlight, fields of debris stretching beyond sensor range, the bones of fleets that had died in battles no one remembered. The Tarn Drift was a graveyard, and it was also a treasure, because dead ships are full of salvage, metals, components, sometimes intact technology worth more than a Khev clan could earn in a generation. And so the drift was contested, fought over by salvager crews and raider confederations, and the occasional desperate independent, a lawless place where the only authority was the gun. We Khev worked the drift in fleets, dozens of raiders together, because alone in that place you were prey and together you were the predator, and our fleet, the one I served on, was one of the largest and most feared in the whole Tarn Drift. I should tell you what it was to work the drift, because the danger of the place was part of why we were what we were. The wreckage was never still. The great hulks tumbled on their slow courses, and the debris fields shifted, and a salvager who misjudged could be crushed between two dead ships the size of mountains, or holed by a fragment moving too fast to see. We lived among the dead, and we grew hard to it. There were ghosts in the drift, the old crews who had died in those hulks, and the Khev are not a superstitious people, but even we lowered our voices sometimes, cutting into a hull that still held the bones of its dead. We told ourselves we feared nothing. The drift taught us quietly every day that this was a lie, that there were things to fear, the tumbling hulks, the void, the dark, but we never applied that lesson to ourselves, to other ships, to the living. Among the living, we were the thing to be feared. We were certain of it. The drift should have taught us humility, and instead it taught us only a harder pride, the pride of creatures who live among the dead and have decided they themselves cannot die. 41 ships. The reaving host, we called ourselves, under a war captain named Sorvo Cree, a Khev of enormous reputation, whose hull carried more painted kills than any captain I had ever served under. We were proud of the reaving host. We were proud of Sorvo Cree. He was everything a Khev was supposed to be, huge, scarred, loud, fearless, with a laugh that filled every channel and a string of boasts that took an hour to recite in full. He had taken more ships than any captain in the drift. He had broken rival fleets and stripped richer vessels than ours could carry and painted every kill on his flagship's hull until the hull was a mosaic of death. And when he walked through his ship the crew parted for him and roared his name, and I worshipped him, I will admit it, the way a young warrior worships the thing he most wants to become. Sorvo Cree was the best of us. That is important. When the human ship taught the reaving host its lesson, it did not teach it to our weakest. It taught it to the best war captain in the Tarn Drift, at the height of his power, surrounded by the most feared fleet in that lawless place. We thought we were the most dangerous thing in the drift. We were not. But it took us a long time to find that out, and the finding cost us everything we thought we were. I want to set the feel of the place, because the feel matters. The Tarn Drift was silent in the way only deep space is silent, but it was a crowded silence, full of the slow grinding of wreckage and the constant low chatter of the fleet's channels and the creak of our own old hull. The light was strange. The drift was far from any star, lit mostly by the distant cold glow of the galactic arm and the running lights of the fleet, so everything moved in shadow and dim color, the great dead hulks looming up out of the dark and falling away again. It smelled, inside our ship, of hot metal and Khev sweat, and the acrid tang of the cutting torches we used on salvage. It sounded of boasts. Always boasts. The Khev are never quiet, and the channels of the reaving host were a constant roar of warriors telling each other what they had taken and what they would take, the endless self-celebration that held our culture together. I loved that sound then. It was the sound of belonging. It is the sound I hear in my nightmares now because of what we were boasting about on the day the human ship came, and what we were about to do. Because here is the part of the story I am most ashamed of, the part the title does not tell you, the part that explains everything that came after. The reaving host was not, on that day, hunting dead ships. We had found something better. We had found the living. There was a convoy in the drift. Refugees. I learned later they were Selit, a small gentle people fleeing some collapse on their homeworld, civilians, families, packed into a handful of old slow transports that had fled into the Tarn Drift because the drift was lawless, and they hoped to slip through it unnoticed to safe space beyond. They were not warriors. They had no weapons worth the name. They were soft, slow ships full of frightened families, and they had made the mistake of crossing the territory of the reaving host. And Sorvo Cree had looked at those defenseless transports full of fleeing civilians and seen exactly what a Khev war captain is trained to see. Easy prey, rich with salvage, and the kind of helpless target that makes for the safest and most profitable kind of raid. I had seen the transports on the sensors before the human ship came, and I want to tell you what I felt because it is the measure of how far I had to travel. I felt excitement, pure, uncomplicated excitement. The transports were slow and soft and full. You could read the life signs, hundreds of them, families packed close. And to me, made correctly Khev that I was, those life signs did not read as people. They read as a full hold, as salvage that breathed, as the richest and easiest taking I had yet seen in my young career, and the place where I might, finally, earn my first boast. I looked at a transport full of frightened Selit children, and I thought about the trophy I would paint, and I felt no pity, none, because pity had been corrected out of me before I was old enough to know what was being removed. That is the truth, and it is unbearable to me now, and I make myself say it because the whole point of this story is the distance between that Drevek and the one speaking to you, and you cannot measure the distance if I hide where I started. We did not even think of it as cruel. I want you to understand that because it is the heart of my shame. We did not think of it as cruel. We thought of it as fortune. 41 Khev raiders, the feared reaving host, descending on a handful of unarmed refugee transports, and the channels roared with anticipation, with boasting, with the ugly joy of the strong about to take from the weak. And I, young, eager, desperate for my first trophy, I roared along with them. There was a captain on the channel laughing about how the soft Selit would barely make a fight of it. There was another already dividing the salvage in his head, out loud, claiming the richest transport for his clan. And under all of it ran the boast songs, the old roaring recitations, because we were about to add a verse to them. The day the reaving host took the refugee convoy in the Tarn Drift, and we were proud, all 41 ships of us, proud and loud and hungry, and entirely certain that what we were about to do was not a sin but a triumph. And then the sensors found the human ship. It came out of the deep drift from the far side of the refugee convoy, placing itself. We did not understand the significance then, directly between the reaving host and the fleeing transports. One ship, a single human warship, unfamiliar in design, matching nothing in our registry. It was not large. That was the first thing the bridge noticed, and the first thing we mocked. It was smaller than our war captain's flagship, smaller than half the raiders in the host, a lean, dark vessel that looked almost modest against the bulk of our fleet. And it had appeared, alone, and positioned itself between 41 Khev raiders and the prey we had already claimed, and it began to broadcast. The human ship's transmission came onto our bridge, translated, and it was calm, and it was clear, and it was not the voice of someone who was afraid, which confused us, because someone in that position should have been very afraid. The human said, "Khev fleet. The convoy behind me is under my protection. They are civilians, refugees, families, no military value, no threat to you. I am asking you to turn around and leave them be. There is salvage enough in this drift for 100 fleets. You don't need to take it from frightened families. Turn around. This is the only warning I'm going to give you, and I'm giving it because I'd rather you live. Turn around." And the reaving host laughed. I laughed. I want to be honest about that all the way through because the honesty is the only thing that makes this worth telling. We laughed, all 41 ships, the channels exploding with derision because it was, to us, the most absurd thing we had ever heard. One small ship, one placing itself in front of 41 Khev raiders and issuing a warning. A warning, to us, the reaving host. Sorvo himself came on the open channel so the whole fleet and the human and the refugees could hear him, and he laughed his great rolling war captain's laugh, and he said, "Little human ship, do you know what we are? We are the reaving host. We have killed more ships than you have ever seen. And you, one hull alone, you place yourself before us and tell us to turn around." He laughed again, and the fleet laughed with him. "I will paint your wreck on my hull, human, and I will tell the story of the day one fool tried to stand between the reaving host and its prey. Move or be moved. You have until I finish laughing." The human ship did not move. And I remember, this is the detail that has stayed with me sharpest across all the years, I remember that the human's reply when it came was not angry. It was not defiant in the way a Khev would be defiant, all roar and challenge. It was quiet, and it was almost sad, and it carried a weight I did not understand until it was far too late. The human said, "I know exactly what you are. That's why I'm still hoping you'll turn around. You think being feared makes you strong. It doesn't. It just means nobody's ever shown you what you're actually up against." A pause. "I'm not going to move. The families behind me have been through enough, and they're not yours to take. So this is me asking one more time and meaning it, please, turn around. I don't want to do this. Don't make me do this. I don't want to do this. Don't make me do this." We laughed harder. Of course we did. To a Khev, those words were the words of the weak, the begging of prey that knows it is caught. We heard them as fear dressed up as mercy, the last bluff of a fool who had picked the wrong fight. There is a thing I have understood only with the years about why we could not hear what the human was actually saying. A Khev cannot conceive of mercy from strength, because in our whole culture mercy only ever came from weakness. The strong took, only the weak asked you to stop. So when a single ship asked 41 to stop, asked it quietly, asked it sadly, asked it please, we could read that only one way, the only way our whole upbringing allowed, as the noise a trapped weak thing makes before it dies. We could not hear the warning because we had no place in our minds for the thing the warning came from. The idea that a ship might be strong enough to destroy us and be asking us to turn around because it did not want to, that was not a thought a Khev could think. It was outside our language. And so the most important communication of my life arrived on our bridge, and we heard only an excuse to laugh. I think about that often now, how the human gave us every chance, 3 times over in plain words, and how our own pride made us deaf to all 3. The human did everything right. The human warned us and warned us again, and warned us a 3rd time and asked please and meant it. The failure was entirely ours. We were not destroyed because a human ship was cruel. We were nearly destroyed because we could not imagine that mercy and power could live in the same hull, and so we spat on the only mercy that could have saved us. Sorvo gave the order. 41 raiders of the reaving host powered up their weapons and moved to swat the single human ship aside and fall upon the refugee transports beyond it, and the channels roared with the joy of the kill. And I, young Drevek, 3rd bridge officer, roared with them, certain, utterly, completely certain, that I was about to watch one small, arrogant human ship die, and then feast on the helpless prey it had so foolishly tried to protect. I was certain. We were all certain. 41 ships of us, the most feared fleet in the Tarn Drift, absolutely certain of the order of the world and our place at the top of it. We had 11 minutes left, all of us, before that certainty died forever. And in those 11 minutes, the lone human ship would teach the reaving host the thing that the strong never learn until it is almost too late, and would then, in the 4 seconds that the title remembers and the histories get wrong, choose to let us live to learn it. Let me tell you what happened in those 11 minutes. Let me tell you what the human ship did and what it did not do, and why the knot is the thing that changed me from a proud, cruel Khev into the old broken truth-teller speaking to you now. But first you had to understand who we were, and what we were about to do, because the human ship did not appear to fight a fleet. It appeared to stop a massacre, and everything turns on that. The first thing the human ship did, when Sorvo Cree gave the order to fire, was nothing. And the nothing is where the lesson began, though it took me years to understand it. 41 Khev raiders opened fire on a single human hull. I want you to picture that, because the picture is important to everything that follows. 41 ships, the most feared fleet in the Tarn Drift, every weapon they carried turned on one small dark vessel that had placed itself in front of a refugee convoy. By every law of war I had ever known, that ship should have ceased to exist in the first volley. That is what happened when 41 Khev raiders fired on one target. The target died. It was not a fight. It was an execution, and we roared for it, the whole fleet, certain we were about to watch the arrogant little ship vanish in fire. It did not vanish. Our fire reached it and stopped. I did not understand what I was seeing at first. None of us did. The human ship had something we had never encountered, some kind of defensive field, and our weapons, the weapons that had broken rival fleets and stripped 1,000 hulks, struck it and were simply turned aside, scattered, absorbed. I do not have the words for it because our science had no words for it. 41 ships worth of fire, the full fury of the reaving host, broke against that single small hull like water against stone, and the human ship did not even maneuver. It held its position in front of the refugees, and it endured our entire fleet's fire, and it did not fire back. That was the first thing it did. It let us hit it. It stood there and took everything 41 Khev raiders could throw, and it did not fall and it did not retaliate. And on the channels of the reaving host, for the first time, the roaring began to change. The boasts faltered. I heard it happen, captain by captain, the realization spreading, that our fire was doing nothing, that the small ship was unhurt, that the thing we had laughed at was standing in our fire as if it were rain. And under the faltering boasts, for the first time in my life aboard the reaving host, I heard the beginning of fear. The human transmitted again, still calm, still somehow sad. The human said, "That was your whole fleet, everything you have, and you saw what it did." A pause. "I'm showing you this on purpose. I want you to understand what you're up against before you decide what happens next, because I am still asking you to turn around. You fired on me now. Among your people, I think that means you can't back down without losing face. I'm telling you that I don't care about your face. I care about the families behind me, and I care, believe it or not, about the thousands of your own people on those 41 ships who are about to die for their captain's pride if he doesn't do the one brave thing he's never had to do, which is stop." Another pause. "Sorvo Cree, I'm talking to you now. Your people are looking at you. You can be the captain who turned around, or you can be the captain who got his whole fleet killed for a convoy of refugees he could have just let go. Choose well. You have less time than you think." And I want to tell you about Sorvo Cree in that moment, because his choice is the hinge of the whole thing, and because I understand now what I could not understand then. Sorvo Cree could not turn around. I do not mean he chose not to. I mean that the thing the human asked of him was, for a Khev war captain at the height of his power in front of his fleet, a kind of death worse than dying. Everything Sorvo Cree was, every painted kill, every boast, every roar of his name in the mess, rested on the certainty that he did not yield, that the reaving host did not yield, that the strong took and were never turned. To turn around now in front of 41 crews on the word of one small ship, it would unmake him. He would never be Sorvo Cree again. He would be the captain who flinched, and among the Khev that was a man already dead in reputation, which to a Khev is the only death that truly counts. The human had read all of this. That is what undoes me, looking back. The human understood Sorvo Cree's trap better than Sorvo Cree did, understood that pride had built him a cage with no door, and the human was begging him, sadly, to break the bars anyway, to choose the lives of his crews over the only thing he had ever valued, which was the way those crews saw him. He could not do it. I watched him fail to do it, on the bridge in real time, And I did not even blame him then, because I was made the same way and I would have failed too. Sorvo Kree's great scarred face on the command channel went dark with a fury that I understand now was mostly terror. The terror of a creature whose entire self was about to be exposed as hollow. And he roared. He roared the way he always roared, because roaring was all he had. And he ordered the fleet to close, to ram if necessary, to overwhelm the single ship by sheer mass, to bury it under 41 hulls, because if our weapons could not touch it, then we would crush it with our bodies, and we would not. Could not, would never turn around. It was the worst order he ever gave. It was the order that nearly killed us all. And it came not from strength, but from the deepest weakness there is, the weakness of a being who would rather destroy everything, including himself and thousands of his own, than be seen to bend. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. The galaxy fears human strength, but the thing that nearly destroyed the reaving host was not human strength. It was Khev pride. The human just stood in front of it patiently and let our pride drive us onto the rocks. The 41 ships of the reaving host closed on the single human vessel, and the human ship transmitted one last time, and its voice had changed, not afraid, never afraid, but heavier, the voice of someone who has run out of other choices and hates the one that's left. The human said, "Okay, okay, I tried. I want it on the record for whoever survives this that I tried." A pause, and then, quieter, almost to itself, almost a prayer, "Lord, forgive me for what these proud fools are making me do." And then to us the last words before the 4 seconds that ended the world I knew, "I'm not going to kill you. Remember that. Whatever you tell yourselves afterward, remember that I could have and I didn't. I'm going to take your teeth, not your lives. Hold on. I'm going to take your teeth, not your lives." I did not understand it. None of us did. And then the 4 seconds happened. I cannot tell you what the human ship did in those 4 seconds, not in any technical way, because our science could not measure it and my eyes could not follow it, and to this day the analysts argue about it. I can only tell you what it looked like, from the third bridge of a Khev raider, and what it looked like was the hand of something vast and precise reaching across the dark, and in the space of 4 heartbeats, disarming an entire fleet. Every weapon on every ship of the reaving host went dead. Not destroyed, dead. In 4 seconds, the human ship did something that reached out to all 41 of us at once and killed our weapons, our targeting, our fire control, every system we had that could harm another ship, surgically, precisely, leaving everything else untouched. And in the same 4 seconds, it killed our drives. Not our life support, not our power, not our hulls, just the engines, the ability to ram, the ability to close, the ability to do harm. 41 Khev raiders, the most feared fleet in the Tarn Drift, went in 4 seconds from a war fleet bearing down on its prey to 41 helpless hulks, fully crewed, fully alive, fully aware, drifting in the dark with no weapons and no engines and no ability to do anything at all except float there and understand what had just happened. The histories say the reaving host was wiped out. They are wrong, and the wrongness is the entire point. We were not wiped out. Every single Khev on all 41 ships, thousands of us, was alive. The human ship had reached into a fleet that was charging to murder a convoy of refugees, a fleet that had laughed at its mercy and fired on it and tried to crush it, a fleet that by every law of war and every Khev expectation had earned annihilation, and it had, with a precision that I still cannot comprehend, removed our ability to do harm without taking a single life. It had taken our teeth, exactly as it said it would. It disarmed 41 warships in 4 seconds, the most overwhelming display of force I have ever witnessed or heard of, and it used that godlike power not to kill us, but to make it impossible for us to kill anyone, and then it stopped. The bridge of my ship was silent. The whole fleet was silent. Every channel, the roaring, boasting, ever-loud reaving host, silent for the first time in my experience. Thousands of Khev warriors floating helpless in the dark, every one of us understanding, all at once, the same impossible thing, that we were alive. That the ship we had mocked could have ended every one of us as easily as it had taken our weapons in the same 4 seconds with the same precision. That it had chosen not to. That we were floating there breathing because a human had decided, while disarming us, while we charged to murder children, that our lives were worth sparing even though we had done nothing to deserve it. And then the human transmitted, one final time, and I have built the rest of my life around what it said. The voice was tired now, drained, the voice of someone who has done a terrible thing they wish they had not had to do. It said, "It's over, you're all alive, check your ships, life support's fine, power's fine, you'll be picked up, you won't die out here. I only took what you were using to hurt people, you get to keep everything else." A pause. I want to tell you why, because I think 1 or 2 of you might be young enough to actually hear it. I didn't kill you because killing you was never the point. The point was the families behind me. The second they were safe, the second you couldn't reach them anymore, I had no reason left to hurt you. None. That's the difference between you and me, and it's the only difference that matters. You take because you can. I stopped the second I didn't have to. You spent today certain that strength means taking whatever you're strong enough to take. The voice hardened just slightly, just at the end. Strength means knowing exactly how much you could take, and taking only what you have to. You just watch something far stronger than you spare your lives for no reason but that it could. Sit with that. Sit with it your whole lives. And the next time you find something weak and frightened and easy in the dark, remember the day you were the weak and frightened and easy thing, and something strong enough to erase you looked at you, and let you live anyway. And the human ship turned, and gathered the refugee convoy behind it, the soft, slow transports full of frightened Sellet families we had been moments from slaughtering, and it escorted them away into the deep drift, toward safe space, and it left 41 helpless Khev raiders floating in the dark to think about what we were. That is what happened in the 11 minutes. That is the thing the title gets wrong. We were not wiped out. We were spared, which is so much worse and so much better, and I have spent every year since trying to understand the difference. And to tell people what a human ship taught the reaving host on the day, we learned that we had never once, in all our boasting, understood what strength actually was. But the story is not over, because being spared did something to the reaving host that being destroyed never could have. It left us alive to change, or to refuse to, and the choice tore the fleet apart. And what happened to Sorvo Cree, and what happened to me in the long aftermath of those 4 seconds, is the last part, and the part that matters most. Let me tell you what a fleet of proud, cruel raiders does when a human strips its teeth, and spares its life, and leaves it floating in the dark with nothing but the truth. We floated in the dark for 19 hours before anyone came, and those 19 hours did more to the reaving host than any weapon ever could have. Because a fleet that has been destroyed feels nothing. A fleet that has been spared has nothing to do but think. Let me tell you what happens to proud, cruel people when their pride is taken from them without their lives. It is not one thing. It split us, those 19 hours and the months after, split the reaving host down a seam none of us had known was there, into the ones who could face what had happened and the ones who could not. And the splitting is the real end of this story, more than the 4 seconds, because the 4 seconds were the human's choice, and the splitting was ours. There were those who could not bear it. I understand them even now. To a Khev raised on the boast, on the certainty that the strong take and the weak are taken, to be spared by a superior force is not mercy. It is the deepest humiliation imaginable. It says, "You were so far beneath me that killing you was not even worth the effort." The proudest of the reaving host heard the human's mercy not as a gift but as the ultimate insult, and it drove some of them mad with shame. And in the months after the drift, more than a few of those captains went looking for deaths that would let them die as Khev were supposed to die, throwing themselves at fights they could not win, because a glorious death was the only way left to erase the stain of having been spared. The mercy killed them, not the human, their own pride, unable to survive being shown itself. I think the human knew that might happen to some. I think that is part of why the voice was so sad. To offer mercy to a creature that has been built to experience mercy as a wound is its own kind of terrible knowledge. And the human carried it, and offered the mercy anyway, because the alternative was killing thousands, and the human would rather wound the unwilling than kill them. And then there was Sorvo Cree. I have to tell you about Sorvo Cree, because what happened to him is the heart of the aftermath, and because for years I could not decide whether it was a tragedy or the only true thing that ever happened to him. Sorvo Cree, the greatest war captain in the Tarn Drift, the man whose hull was a mosaic of kills, the best of us. Sorvo Cree had been broken in those 4 seconds more completely than any of us, because he had the most to lose and he lost all of it at once. His whole self had rested on the certainty that he did not yield, and a human ship had made yielding irrelevant, had simply removed his ability to do anything at all, and in doing so had revealed the thing his entire roaring life had been built to hide. That the strength he had worshipped was never really strength. That he had been, the whole time, just a creature taking what it could from things too weak to stop it, and calling that strength because no one had ever been strong enough to show him the difference. The human had shown him the difference. In 4 seconds, and Sorvo Cree, floating helpless in the dark, had to live in the rubble of everything he had been. He did not seek a glorious death. That is the thing that surprised me, that surprised everyone. The greatest boaster of the reaving host did the one thing no one expected, the thing that was, in its way, braver than any death he could have thrown himself at. He went quiet. In the 19 hours of floating, and the long months after, Sorvo Cree stopped roaring and stopped boasting and began, slowly, painfully, like a creature learning to use a limb it had never known it had, to think. To actually think about what we were, about what we had done, about the families on those transports and what the human had stood between us and. I do not know everything that happened inside him. Khev do not easily speak of their inner weather, and Sorvo Cree least of all. But I watched the change from the outside, and the change was real, and it was the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched a person do, because it is so much harder to live changed than to die unchanged, and Sorvo Cree chose the harder thing. He disbanded the reaving host. When we were finally picked up and our ships repaired, the human had been right, of course. No one died. We were salvaged and made whole. Sorvo Cree called the fleet together one last time, and he did not roar, and he did not boast, and he told the captains of the reaving host that he was finished, that the host was finished, that he would no longer lead warriors to take from the weak, and that any who wished to follow him into whatever came next were welcome, and any who did not should go, and he would not stop them. Many left. They cursed him for a coward, for a Khev who had let one human ship steal his spine, and they went back to the raiding life. And I have no doubt some of them found their glorious deaths eventually, in the dark, taking from things too weak to stop them, learning nothing. The boast culture is old and strong, and it does not release most of those it holds. But some of us stayed. I stayed. And here is where I have to tell you about myself, because the reason I am the one telling this story is that I was young enough, that day in the drift, to be one of the 1 or 2 the human hoped might actually hear it. I was on the bridge when the human said, "Sit with it your whole lives." I was 19 hours floating in the dark, 19 years old by Khev reckoning, young and cruel and certain, and I had spent the whole approach dreaming of my first trophy, of the boast I would paint, of the frightened Sellet families rendered down to salvage that breathed. And the human ship had reached into our fleet and spared my unworthy life, and then asked the young one specifically, by name almost, to remember the day I was the weak and frightened and easy thing, and something strong enough to erase me let me live anyway. And I could not stop hearing it. In the dark, in the silence, in the long hours, I could not stop seeing those transports the way I had seen them through the sensors, a full hold, salvage that breathed, and then seeing them again the way the human must have seen them. Families, children, frightened people who had already lost their world and were about to lose their lives to a young Khev's hunger for a boast. The human had looked at the same transports I had and seen people where I had seen prey, and had been willing to disarm a fleet and wound the proud and carry the sad weight of mercy to keep those people safe. And I had been about to murder them for a trophy. That is the thing that changed me, not the display of force. The force was just the thing that got my attention. What changed me was understanding in the silence after that the human and I had looked at the exact same thing, and that one of us had seen people and one of us had seen salvage, and that the difference between us was not strength. The human had all the strength. The difference was that the human had never let strength talk it out of seeing people. That was the whole lesson. That was what strength was for, not for taking, for protecting the thing you were strong enough to take and choosing instead to shield it. I had had the lesson exactly backwards my whole life, and so had my people, and a single human ship had stood in front of a refugee convoy and corrected the error of an entire culture, patiently, sadly, at the cost of carrying a wound it did not want, and it had spared me to learn from it. I followed Sorvokri into what came after. It was not glorious. We became, it is almost funny and I say it without shame now, though the old Drevek would have died before admitting it, we became protectors. Sorvokri took the ships and the warriors who stayed, and he turned the skills of raiding to the opposite purpose, and we spent the rest of his life and most of mine, working the lawless edges of the drift not to take from the weak, but to stand between the weak and the takers. We escorted convoys. We drove off raiders, our own former kind sometimes, the old reaving host captains who had cursed us and gone back to the boast. We became, in our small way, the thing the human ship had been, the hull that stands between the prey and the predator and says, this far and no further. We were not as strong as the human. We could not disarm a fleet in 4 seconds. But we did what we could with what we had, and we did it for the reason the human had taught us, which was that strength that does not protect is just hunger wearing armor. Sorvokri died old in the end defending a salvager crew from a raider attack, and he died not boasting but quiet, and the last thing he said to me, I was his second by then, was the thing I have carried longest. He said, Drevek. When you tell it, tell them I was the worst of us. Don't make me a hero. I was the worst of us, and a human ship had to break me to make me anything else, and the only thing I ever did right was let it. He paused, and the old scarred face that had once roared 1,000 boasts was peaceful, finally peaceful. Tell them being spared is harder than being killed, and tell them it's worth it. Tell them you can be the worst thing in the dark and still get to choose, right up until the end, to be something better. The human gave me that choice when it could have just killed me. That's the whole gift. That's the only boast I want on my hull, that I got the choice, and I finally chose right. We never learned the name of the human ship or its captain. I have looked in all the years since. There is no record of it, no registry, no glory claimed. Whoever they were, they stood in front of a refugee convoy at the edge of civilized space, disarmed the most feared fleet in the Tarn Drift in 4 seconds, spared thousands of lives that had not earned sparing, escorted some frightened families to safety, and vanished, asking for nothing, claiming nothing, leaving behind only a lesson and the people changed by it. That is the most human thing in the whole story, I have come to think. Not the 4 seconds, the vanishing, the doing of the impossible, terrible, merciful thing and then simply leaving, no trophy, no boast, no painted kill, because to them it was never about being seen to be strong. It was only ever about the families behind them. The second they were safe, the human had no more reason to be there, and so it left. They mocked one mysterious human warship, and the histories say their entire fleet was wiped out in seconds. It is not true. Our weapons were wiped out. Our pride was wiped out. The lie we had lived by, that strength means taking, was wiped out in 4 seconds by a ship that could have wiped out our lives in the same 4 seconds and chose, instead, to spare every one of us. We were not destroyed. We were shown mercy by something that had every right to destroy us. And that is the most frightening thing in the galaxy, and the most hopeful, and they are the same thing. that the strongest force any of us had ever encountered was also the most merciful, and that it used its terrible power not to take our lives but to give us back the chance to deserve them. I was the cruelest kind of young fool. On the day a human ship taught me what strength is for. I have spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of having been spared. That is the only boast I have, and it is the only one worth making.